Imperial China, a civilization of glory and unseen suffering. Spanning over 2,000 years, Imperial China was one of the most powerful and enduring empires in world history. Dynasties rose and fell, yet its cultural, scientific, and philosophical legacy continued to grow. Confucianism shaped the moral fabric of society. Bureaucracy was refined to a level unseen in most of the ancient world. Breakthroughs in technology, medicine, and astronomy put China centuries ahead of its time. To the outside world, and even to modern audiences, the empire seems majestic. Palaces, calligraphy, jade ornaments, and silk robes paint a picture of elegance, wisdom, and order. But this image is incomplete. What textbooks rarely emphasize is this: Imperial China was not built for the common man, it was built on his back. For the vast majority of its population, life in the empire was not one of beauty or dignity. While emperors were called the sons of heaven, most citizens lived as if they were invisible. They worked the land, paid crushing taxes, endured harsh weather and stricter laws, and bowed endlessly to rulers, parents, ancestors. Because hierarchy wasn't just tradition, it was law. There was little room for ambition if you were born poor, female, or outside the elite circles. Social mobility was a cruel illusion, and survival often came down to obedience over talent. This video isn't here to glorify the past. It's here to show both faces of history, the brilliance of a great civilization and the silent suffering beneath it. If you ever dreamed of living in a grand historical era, this might make you think twice. A ladder you couldn't climb, the rigid social hierarchy of Imperial China. In Imperial China, where you were born decided everything, from what you ate to whether your voice mattered at all. Society wasn't fluid, it was frozen in layers. And unless you were born at the top, you stayed at the bottom, no matter how hard you tried. At the pinnacle stood the emperor, hailed as the Son of Heaven. His power was absolute, divine, unquestionable, until it wasn't. If disaster struck or people revolted, it meant he had lost the mandate of heaven and could be overthrown without mercy. Below him were the scholar officials. These men passed brutal civil service exams that took years, sometimes decades, of memorizing Confucian texts. If they succeeded, they joined the bureaucracy and lived off the labor of the peasants. But even their lives weren't secure. Power was fickle, and their status depended on staying in favor. Then came the peasants, the backbone of the empire. They toiled endlessly in fields, paid heavy taxes, and endured famine, drought, and war. Their reward? Survival, if lucky. Artisans and merchants might be rich, but wealth didn't equal respect. Merchants were considered morally inferior. Profit was seen as selfish. Status was inherited, not earned. And at the very bottom, soldiers, slaves, and women, the silent class. No power, no rights, no future. A soldier bled for the empire but earned no honor. A woman lived to obey her father, her husband, and eventually her son. This was not a society where hard work led to success. It was a locked system where your fate was sealed at birth, and your only real freedom was how well you endured it. Daily life in Imperial China, a routine of obedience and survival. Forget the palace walls and silk robes. For the average person in Imperial China, daily life was a cycle of rules, rituals, and relentless hardship. From the moment you woke up, hierarchy shaped your every move. The first duty of the day wasn't eating, it was bowing. To your parents, to your ancestors, to any authority above you. Rituals weren't optional, they were law. A wrong gesture, a missed greeting, even an unintended look of disrespect could lead to beatings, exile, or worse. Reverence wasn't just cultural, it was enforced. As for breakfast, don't expect a royal feast. Most people started the day with congee, a thin, watery rice porridge with little to no flavor and certainly no meat. Meat was a luxury reserved for festivals or offerings. For most of the year, it simply didn't exist on the plate. Tea was the drink of choice, not out of sophistication, but necessity. River water was often contaminated, causing disease. Boiling tea leaves became the safest way to hydrate. Hygiene? Let's just say it wasn't a priority. Bathing was infrequent, and when it did happen, it involved soap made from animal fat, harsh and unpleasant. Toothbrushes didn't exist. Instead, people used salt or charcoal to scrub their teeth, leading to widespread dental issues, infections, and chronic pain. You worked until your body gave out, then went to sleep and repeated the cycle. There was no weekend, no break, no room for individuality. Your role was defined, your voice silenced, your worth measured by how well you obeyed. To live as a commoner in Imperial China wasn't to live with purpose. It was to survive by submission, day after day, ritual after ritual. And if you ever dared to dream of something more, that was the most dangerous act of all. Law and order in Imperial China, justice by fear. In Imperial China, the law didn't protect you, it warned you. The legal system wasn't built on fairness or mercy, it was built on control. From the emperor's court down to the village magistrate, punishment wasn't just a response to crime, it was a public performance meant to terrify. Break the rules, even a minor one, and you could be beaten with bamboo rods in front of your entire village. Speak out of turn to an official? You might be forced to kneel for hours on stones or iron thorns. Steal a bowl of rice during famine? Say goodbye to your fingers, if not your life. Some punishments were worse than death. Torture was used liberally to extract confessions, whether true or not. Finger clamps crushed bones. Prisoners were forced to kneel until their legs bled. Public executions, beheadings, limb removal, even lynching, death by 1,000 cuts, served as chilling warnings. Defy the empire, and your suffering will be legendary. Treason wasn't just a personal crime, it was a family curse. If you were accused of rebelling against the state, your parents, siblings, spouse, even distant relatives could be executed alongside you. Guilt was hereditary, and you were never truly alone. In every village, people were appointed to report suspicious behavior, neighbors spying on neighbors, children reporting parents. Loyalty to the state outranked loyalty to blood. Inside the palace, control was even tighter. Eunuchs monitored officials, intercepted letters, and silenced rumors. Whispers of dissent vanished before they reached the emperor's ears. There was no concept of innocent until proven guilty. You were guilty if the system said so, and once marked, there was no escape. In Imperial China, obedience wasn't just expected, it was enforced through terror. And justice? That was reserved for those powerful enough to rewrite it. Marriage and family in Imperial China, a life you didn't choose in Imperial China. Love had no place in marriage. Romance was a fantasy, and personal choice was a luxury only the powerful could afford. Marriage wasn't about connection, it was about control. Parents arranged everything, from the bride's age to the dowry amount, often before the couple even reached puberty. The bride and groom might not see each other until the wedding day, and even then, their opinions meant nothing. Love was irrelevant. Obedience was everything. For women, marriage wasn't a beginning. It was a transfer of ownership. From birth, a girl was taught one rule: obey. First her father, then her husband, and finally her son. Her worth was tied to her ability to serve others and, most importantly, bear sons. From as young as 5 years old, girls were subjected to foot binding, a cruel ritual in which their feet were broken and tightly bound to create the coveted lotus feet. The process was excruciating, often leading to lifelong disability, infection, and even death. But in a society that equated small feet with virtue, beauty, and obedience, pain was simply part of becoming marriage material. Polygamy was common among men of status. A man could take concubines freely, while his wife had no say and no way out. If she failed to produce a male heir, she could be ignored, replaced, or cast aside. A woman's identity was defined by her fertility and her silence, and yet divorce was nearly impossible for women. The law allowed men to abandon wives for vague reasons: disobedience, jealousy, or talking too much. But a woman seeking freedom? That was unheard of. In Imperial China, family wasn't a place of warmth. It was a system of hierarchy, where love was silenced, choice was denied, and freedom was crushed under the weight of tradition. To be born a woman wasn't just unfortunate, it was a life sentence. Education in Imperial China, the exam that decided your fate. In Imperial China, education wasn't about personal growth or creative thinking. It was a brutal, all-or-nothing gamble, where one exam could lift your family out of poverty or bury your dreams forever. The imperial examination system was seen as the only legitimate path to upward mobility. But the path was narrow, steep, and merciless. Boys began their studies as young as 5, memorizing Confucian classics line by line, not understanding, just memorizing. Thousands of characters recited daily, often by candlelight, under the watchful eyes of fathers who saw their son's success as the family's only hope. There were no subjects like science or logic, only essays, flawless in structure, flowery in language, and unwaveringly loyal to Confucian ideals. Creativity was punished, conformity was rewarded. The pressure was unimaginable. Exams were held in massive, silent compounds where candidates sat alone in tiny, windowless cells, sometimes for up to 3 days, writing until their hands bled. Food, water, and bedding were brought in. Some died of exhaustion. Others committed suicide, unable to bear the shame of failure, and yet most failed. Repeatedly. For the few who passed, a life of prestige awaited, positions as scholar officials, power, stability, and honor. But for the rest, failure wasn't just personal, it was a family disgrace. Years of sacrifice gone, parents disappointed, futures collapsed. Some spent their entire lives chasing this dream, dying as failed scholars, their names never remembered, their efforts buried with them. In a system where hard work didn't guarantee success, only perfection did, education became a battlefield of the mind, not for enlightenment, but for survival. And the cruelest part? The exam didn't test who you were. It tested how well you could disappear into the system. Rebellion in Imperial China, rise up and be erased. When life offers no voice, no choice, and no future, eventually people will rise. Throughout the long history of Imperial China, countless rebellions erupted, each one a desperate scream from the bottom of the social ladder. Peasants, soldiers, scholars, they rose not for power, but for a chance to breathe freely. But the empire didn't listen. It crushed them, harshly, publicly, permanently. The price of rebellion was not just your life, it was your legacy. Villages that dared defy the emperor were burned to ash. Entire families, children, elders, even neighbors, were executed to make examples. The logic was simple: kill one rebel, and 100 more may rise. But kill his entire bloodline, and fear will silence the rest. Leaders of uprisings were often paraded through the streets before execution, not as martyrs, but as warnings. Heads displayed on city gates, bodies hung at crossroads. Their names entered history not as heroes, but as traitors. But still, rebellions kept happening. The human spirit refuses to bow forever. Secret societies formed in the shadows. Slogans like "Heaven is angry" or "The emperor has lost the mandate" spread like wildfire. Some revolts lasted years, toppling entire dynasties. Others were crushed in weeks, leaving no trace but ash and silence. And even when they failed, these rebels carved invisible scars into the empire's walls, reminders that no system, no matter how brutal, is ever truly invincible. Yet in the official history books, their stories were rewritten, sanitized, or erased. Because in Imperial China, truth belonged to the victors, and the victors feared truth more than swords. To rebel was to gamble everything, and most lost. But their defiance lit sparks in the dark, and sometimes one spark was all it took to burn down a throne. The legacy of Imperial China, a civilization of splendor and silence. Imperial China left behind a legacy that shaped not just one nation, but the world. It gave us paper, the compass, gunpowder, and printing, tools that transformed humanity. Its architecture defied time, its philosophy shaped cultures, its art, literature, and innovations still echo through history. On the surface, it was a civilization of brilliance, refined, disciplined, enduring. But beneath that grandeur lies another truth, a truth rarely told in history books. It was also a civilization built on strict hierarchy, systemic oppression, and the silencing of millions. For every emperor's edict preserved in jade and silk, there were thousands of nameless laborers who died building monuments they'd never be allowed to enter. For every Confucian poem memorized by a scholar, there were countless peasants who couldn't even afford to learn their own names. The empire flourished, but not equally. It demanded absolute obedience, punished ambition from below, and preserved power for the few at the top. Women were bound, physically and socially. Dissenters were erased, and the poor were taught not to dream, but to endure. People were not citizens, they were subjects, tools of the state, cogs in a machine too sacred to question. Yes, Imperial China was magnificent, but it was also merciless. Its glory was real, but so was the suffering that fed it. To remember this empire fully is to see both its light and its shadow, to admire what it built, but never forget what it cost. Because history is not just the story of emperors and inventions, it's also the pain of the voiceless, buried beneath the marble, beneath the scrolls, beneath the silence. And perhaps the most dangerous legacy is forgetting that they ever existed.